is the first 6 weeks of the academic year, where there is statistically higher rate of sexual violence perpetration according to the Department of Justice. And at UW Oshkosh, we work to reclaim the red zone by providing 6 weeks of awareness activities and educational opportunities to prevent sexual and interpersonal violence on our campus and in our community. So, a quick few virtual meeting notes before we begin. This session is being recorded with the consent of the panelists. All attendees' microphones will be muted to reduce background noise, and we encourage you to ask questions in the chat at any point during the event. Please join me in acknowledging the indigenous land that we are on as we begin this event. We acknowledge the original inhabitants of this area, the Menominee and the Ho-Chunk Nations. This land encompasses the three campuses of the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh in the Lake Winnebago region. Please take a moment to honor these ancestral grounds and celebrate the resilience and strength that all Indigenous people have shown worldwide. Thank you. Okay, so today we have a great panel joining us virtually to discuss the connections between the Black Lives Matter and Me Too movements. So, both of which were founded by Black women. The Black Lives Matter movement was founded by Black queer women. While these are more recent movements, they do connect to a longer history of anti-racist and anti-violence movements. So, I will turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves. We will go in the following order. Nestic, Robin, Dr. Bowser, and then Dr. Warren.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Nestic Morris, and I'm the outreach coordinator at the Wisconsin Coalition Against Sexual Assault. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm excited to be here.
I see Robin here. Robin.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Robin Tinnon. I'm Executive Director of We All Rise African American Resource Center. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm really excited to be a part of this panel. I actually woke up with an allergic reaction on my eyeball, so if I duck out, it got worse, but I'm here for it all, so I'm going to push through. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, and I'm sorry to hear about your allergic reaction.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dr. Teysha Bowser. I'm an assistant professor for the professional counseling department. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm also super excited to be a part of this panel and have this discussion with you all.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Veronica Warren. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the Associate Director of the Counseling Center here at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, and I'm thankful that you invited me today to be a part of the panel.
Thank you. So I realized I didn't introduce myself, but my name is Alicia. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I direct the Women's Center here at UW Oshkosh, and I also teach in our Women's and Gender Studies program. And I'm going to be helping moderate the panel today. So our first question for the panelists is a big one. So how do sexual violence and racism relate to one another? And whoever wants to jump in and go first is welcome to.
I can jump in. This is Robin. For many of our clients, and for many of the women that we serve, it changes the way that they heal. It changes the way that they report. And so for many of them, they're not seeking clinical supports. Um, sounds really funky. Can everybody hear me?
There is a bit of background noise. Okay, try again.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. So for many of our clients, it changes the way that they report, the way that they heal. And so what we see for a lot of Black women that come to our agency is that they've tried holistic supports, pastors online, not even seeking traditional services within the church. They've went on YouTube. They've prayed about it in a silo. They've reached out to one of the multiple friends that they have because they feel like if they jump into supports that they're not going to be able to like draw back from it. They're afraid. And so it goes like hand in hand with each other. So many of our folks are not seeking the services and the supports that they need because systemic racism has not allowed them clinical supports, not allowed them the space, the time, or the dollars that they need to heal.
I would add that these are, when you look at how do sexual violence and racism relate to one another, these are deliberate systems of oppression that are intended to keep people marginalized. Um, these systems have victims and survivors tell their stories, which is always traumatic. And oftentimes they are the ones that are held on the defense to defend their reputation. They, in many instances, are criminalized for voicing their concerns, their oppression. And there's layers of oppression. When you think about intersectionality, such as race and gender, sexual orientation. And so when you talk about the relationship, it's very complex, right? Where their voices are not heard. When you even think of trans Black women whose voices are not heard. Black women have been identified as one of the most highly educated group of women, but we still are devalued, marginalized, exploited, discriminated against. And so it's this is a loaded first question, right? And I think with this first question, Alicia, it could have went the whole gamut, right, of this discussion. But it is rooted in power. And I know one of the questions we'll get to about power, so I won't go there. But it is a very intentional system that is deliberate in its continued oppression of people.
I would just add with both of those, with sexual violence and with racism, a lot of them function, especially particularly with Black women, on stereotypes and these images of Black women, whether it's seeing them as like this Jezebel who, you know, they were asking for these things because they're just super hyper sexualized and they can't control themselves. And then also in regards to on the opposite end of the spectrum, really like mammifying Black women and seeing them as that they're supposed to be selfless and nurturing, and you know they're not allowed to feel or experience anything but being strong, and that they're not allowed to ask for help or cry for help, or um, you know, they don't even experience pain. Their sole purpose is to care for others. And so I think within these two systems of power, I think it really helps to reinforce and maintain these images and stereotypes.
I would just add what everybody else is saying. It's definitely just about power and power and control. You stay in your place You stay there, and that's it. And if we're thinking back, although it started on the plantation, right, as somebody just talked about, Black women were used as sexual concubines at the will of white men. You do what I say or you die, literally. And then Dr. Veronica talked about it being layers to it. Starting on the plantation, there was layers to it, the intersectionalities of being a Black woman and being in between white men and white women. So white women would spew that hate towards Black women, when in fact they knew that their husbands were in the back raping Black women and doing what they please, but they despised them, the Black women, over everything else, over their husbands doing the raping. And so, like I said, it was just, it's a thing about power and control.
So that seems like a natural segue into our next question, and we have lots of time allocated to these first two questions, so feel free to expand as much as you would like. So the next kind of question or prompt is that the week 4, which is the current week of the red zone that we're in, the theme is power and control. So could you elaborate or talk more about how power and control relate to sexual violence and racism?
I think, as previously stated by so many already, that this is something that has been rooted in the fabric of America. When we go back to slavery, it has been a dominance of Black bodies, as already been stated, where Black men and women were victims of rape as a means of submission. It is even after slavery, you had where it was used to not only intimidate, but also incriminate Black Americans. And so even when we look at Black men who have been accused of rape, that were not the actual aggressor. So it has been used as a continual victimization. Also, even though we've talked about the historical context, even about 4 years ago, there was a police officer, a white police officer, who used the power of his position to forcibly rape and victimize Black women in the community that he was supposed to serve, in a way to satisfy his needs and for them to fall into submission so they wouldn't be ticketed or arrested. And so this is something that unfortunately has been perpetuated in our society. And it doesn't stop there.
I can follow up. America has this deep, dark history of white women weaponizing their whiteness to dictate the actions of Black people, and particularly Black men and police departments. Emmett Till is the very derivative of that, right? Like Black people knew that this woman was lying from the beginning. She did not just wake up one day, or maybe she did wake up one day and say, you know, I think I'm gonna lie on a Black man or a Black boy, right? And so she knew that all she had to do was mention a Black man, and that police departments and her brothers and her uncles and the neighbor down the street knew, as long as she mentioned a Black man, a Black boy, I'm sorry, I have to be cognizant of that, a Black boy, then shit would hit the fan. And that's exactly what did. And a couple of years ago, she decided to speak her truth and say that she was lying the entire time. But like so many have been saying, this is the very underbelly of America that, and if you watch like any crime shows, full disclosure, I am a First 48 fanatic. I went to Force 48 University. And if you're watching any type of crime shows, somebody always blames the Black man. There's this woman who was a white woman who was being interviewed, and she was like, I can't remember, Pookie made me do it. And everybody is like, oh, okay, that's convenient. But what I'm saying, like that's what it is. That's all you have to do is blame it on the Black kid, and things will go far left on behalf of the Black man. Brian Banks was a high school football hopeful who was wrongfully convicted of rape and spent 6 years in prison. He contacted the girl that said that she raped him, and asked her why she did it, and she was like, I didn't really think it was going to be that big of a deal, right? And so the history of white women weaponizing their whiteness to dictate Black men's actions is in the very fabric of America.
Nestic, would you mind, just in case folks aren't familiar with the Emmett Till case, would you mind giving a brief overview, and then also maybe helping people understand the connection down to like Amy Cooper calling the police in the park?
Yeah, so Emmett Till was a 14-year-old Black boy who was visiting his family in the Deep South. White woman, he was at the store. A white woman said that he whistled at her. She went back and told her family, and he was killed. He was killed based off of this white woman saying that he tried to rape her, essentially. And the difference between the Amy Coopers and the Emmett Till story is that there was a camera this time, right? Well-intended white women are just as problematic as flat-out racist women, in my opinion. I tell people all the time, I like my racism hard, right? I like my racism hard, like I like my tequila. Give it to me straight, right? And so well-intended white women, Amy Cooper claims to be a liberal, right? And so the perpetuation of well-intending and how it is problematic for Black men.
Thank you.
I'll just add, we talked about that these two things have a lot of historical background. And I think when we're thinking about power and control, it's also important to recognize that, Black people in general, even women, were considered property for a long time. And Black people in general were considered non-humans. And oftentimes people still view Black people in this way. And so, with sexual violence, with racism, it's a reminder that we don't see your humanity, and that for a lot of people, whether they consciously think about it or not, it's just like, you're supposed to belong to me. You are supposed to be my possession, and I'm allowed to do and say whatever I want to you. You shouldn't be in positions of power. And people, through sexual violence, through racism, some more overt than others in terms of racism. I think about in academia and other spaces, there are a lot of microaggressions that happen. And maybe it's because people subconsciously are like, you shouldn't be in certain positions, you're not supposed to be in power. And it comes up, and you're expected, individuals are expected to just deal with it, to just accept it. Because, well, it's gotten better than what it used to be, supposedly. And so I think we really need to question and reflect on that. Why is my response when I see someone who is Black or who's a Black woman, why do I feel uncomfortable with them being in positions of power? Why is my first instinct to question them, or in certain ways that I would never take that response to people of other identities?
one of the things that I would like to add that Dr. Bowser just expressed about microaggressions. I think I respect the work and research that has gone on in regards to microaggressions. And even when I think about my research and how it highlighted microaggressions and how that impacts Black women on predominantly white religious campuses, I think we have to use our voice to make it clear that microaggressions is still racist behavior, right? And I think people have been let off the hook that, oh, it's a microaggression, it's a small thing that I said or something small that I did, but it's still rooted in racist behavior or sexist behavior. And so we can't let people off the hook. I think that's one of the biggest things, is making sure that when those things occur, we call them out. We have to feel like we're supported. So even understanding who our support is, because like previously stated, a lot of times when we go to vocalize our concerns, then we become demonized for vocalizing our concerns. But it should not have the power to further stifle us from using our voice. And so, and that's what isms are designed to do, is to stifle people from progressing in any type of way, from having viable discussions at a table, from viable economic systems, healthcare systems, true access to justice, where we are not falling victims to those who believe that they should be the judge, juror, and executioner. And so being able to speak out, like it was previously stated, like, having the racism, raw, straight in your face, and knowing where you're coming from without me having to figure it out. But regardless of how it comes, we need to be just as vocal. So, yeah.
That was so powerful. So powerful. Thank you.
Robin, would you like to add anything?
Yes, for me, as these beautiful women are talking, what comes to mind is the documentary, The 13th, and the way that white supremacy still is able to cloak itself and just change the way that people feel about their freedom, right? Like, mass incarceration is the new slavery. And a lot of Black folks are operating, feeling as if they should be free, but knowing that they are still chained. Like in their soul, knowing that they're still bound by many things, and the isms are affecting them in a lot of different ways. And so white supremacy has manifested in all fabrics of my clients' lives. And I'm thinking about how many women are jumping to say, but this is not still affecting me. That shows up every single day. This is not still affecting me. I should not have this excuse. They've not been given the tools, the resources, the supports that they need to heal. And white supremacy has literally, I always talk about how many Black women in our community are trying to help and heal one another, but has never been given the tools that they've needed, right? And so we are even having folks that are comparing traumas with one another, because so many of our women are affected by patriarchy, imperialism, colonialism, heteronormativity. So many of the root causes of oppression, and they're finding beautiful ways every single day to help one another and barter with each other, um, and use what they have to be successful and to bounce back. And yet, like some of you referred to, are still the highest graduates, college graduates right now, doing really amazing things. And that goes back to the soul of Black folks. Makes me think of the power in resilience, and how so many of our community is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And yet are still able to make really amazing things happen.
Thank you.
Can I piggyback off what Robin was saying about the criminal justice system and the 13th and all of that?
Absolutely.
Wisconsin has 38 adult prisons in the state of Wisconsin. We have gone from being known as the dairy state to being known as the prison state, because we are throwing up new prisons around the state like nobody's business. And the privatization of that is $1 billion industry. And they're being paid per prisoner, right? They have a quota to meet. And Black men are at the top of that list, right? There is a very sick saying in the state of Wisconsin with Black people: you come on vacation and you leave on probation. And that just says a lot to Black people and where they are and where Wisconsin is as a state. And based on those extravagant numbers, and depending on where you are in the United States, Black men are still on chain gangs, right? And they're out in the fields and they're doing work, and they are chained to another Black man. And so oftentimes you'll hear me say that slavery never left, slavery just evolved.
Thank you. I was wondering if, kind of related to what you all have been talking about, does the kind of connection to prison and the overcriminalization of Black men in particular, does that impact Black women in particular if they experience sexual assault or domestic violence by Black men? Does that impact their decision to report? Or kind of if you want to explore some of that relationship?
I can jump in. So yes, it does. I have had Black women who have in my life, and the people that I have been working with, who have stayed just because they can't hand a Black man over to a system that has traditionally failed them, right? So yes, he might be knocking me over the head every now and again, but I can't report, or I can't, like I said, hand him over to a system. And oftentimes that is used against them. Like, do you want to report me raping you? You're gonna send another Black man to jail, which is those layers that we have been discussing, and Black women being strong and resilient, and all of those. Sometimes dog whistles that are used, being a strong Black woman, and all of those types of things. And so, yes, that is often the case.
One of the things, as I keep hearing this discussion, and it keeps going back to the foundation structure that America has laid out for Black people. And so, even when you think about early on, Black families were always separated. It was, there was no structure. There was very few times that they were kept together as a family. And so you had husbands being sold off, wives being sold off, children being sold off. And so when you even think about what does the foundation of a Black family looks like, it looks very different, right? And so how to understand how to work together and navigate as a unit has been very hard for Black families to do, but Black families have done it successfully, okay? But once again, there is a foundation that has been laid that society or a larger racial structure does not want to see the Black family intact. And so even when you start looking at children, Black boys in particular, around second and third grade, when they are rambunctious and still running around the classroom, no different than their white male peers, right? Black boys are traditionally then tested, wanting them to be placed on medication, and then that begins to start the cycle of their demise as far as they cannot function in certain circles. And so, which is further detrimental to their livelihood. But then once again, it impacts the Black family because now you have women who are maybe the head of the household that are then trying to save their Black son, but do not know how to effectively advocate for them because we have not been taught or given the tools to do so. And so a lot of times they go along with what the system is telling them, and then this spins the cycle that maybe they are not given all the academic resources in order to be successful. So once again, you know, you have to always go back to the beginning and what the root cause is for some of these things that even lead to the prison pipeline. And so, because it is ingrained in our structure of the society.
Yes, and Dr. Grady is sharing that the achievement gap begins for Black boys. It's what happens at the beginning of the race that makes the biggest difference. Dr. Bowser, would you like to add anything additional?
I mean, I agree with everything that's been said, and I think like when you think about prisons, and just even like where people are located in the neighborhoods, there's a big focus in terms of containment. There's always been a focus on Black people to contain them in some form or fashion. And what are the implications of that? And then even thinking about, violence between Black men and Black women, you know, um, when you look at this idea of like post-traumatic slave syndrome, which Dr. DeGray like talks about, a lot of people talk about that oftentimes issues with domestic violence or violence in general between people of the same, racial background has a lot to do with like this reflection of this frustration of feeling like this power in the system is like oppressing them and, you know, brutalizing them and feeling like they can't access it and having this internalized frustration, and then because of proximity and seeing themselves in this individual, then they may act out on that. And what does that really mean um, for the system, and also thinking about, I mean, whether we want to really address it or not, this society was founded on violence. So you impact violence on other people. What do you really expect to get out? People are experiencing a lot of anger, a lot of different emotions, and it's not like after slavery, people were like, "Hey, you want to do some counseling? You want to do some therapy?" So there's a lot of intergenerational trauma, historical trauma that's impacting these groups of people, and oftentimes they are not given the space to really process that. So you're just having generations carrying on past generations' trauma, and it just impacts us in different ways. And I think that's something like our society really has to address. And I think we don't like to talk about it because it's uncomfortable. But then we want to blame people for their actions and what happens. Even thinking about rioting and looting and all of these things that are happening right now. And so people, condemn and criminalize that. And I'm not saying that, oh, it's the right thing to do, but you have 400 plus years of anger and frustration. It has to come out in some form or fashion.
Would you share, just in case folks aren't aware of the post-traumatic slave syndrome, could you just describe it briefly?
So really, it's just this idea that because of the the system of slavery and that experience, that a lot of symptoms that you would find in post-traumatic syndrome in general are impacting Black people because of this, and it um, pops up in different ways. There's flashbacks of things, um, experiencing a lot of anger, um, and I just think it's when you think about just trauma in general, like it's a lot of stuff comes up. I know a lot of people are like, "Oh, slavery happened in the past, get over it," but something that impactful for people, it's not going to disappear. It's just going to continue to pass on, especially when you don't acknowledge it.
Thank you. Does
They,
anybody else want to add in?
yeah, it's Nestic again. Sorry. Society would never tell Holocaust survivors to get over it, right? Like we know that was a horrible time in history, and we feel empathy and we feel sympathy for Holocaust survivors. Even in anything that happened during 9/11, we are taught to never forget that. But slavery, Nestic, you and Dr. Rouser and your people, you need to get over it, right? Like we would never do that. We would never expect folks who have experienced some type of trauma to be like, get over it. That was so long ago. And it's just disheartening to have to explain that to people, right? So we wouldn't do that to other people. So we need to get away from that as far as Black people and just supposedly getting over slavery.
Just to piggyback off of Nestic, but I think that is what the system has been designed to do. And it gets back to get over it as a means to stifle our experiences. It means to not address our experiences. It's meant to not put in those policies at a micro level to ensure that we have full rights and privileges as every other citizen, right? And so it is very intentional about the get over it aspect. And it's just a further tactic in order to ensure that we stay in our place as opposed to being given all the rights and privileges that we are due.
Robin, I'm sorry to see that your eye is not getting better. um, so we could move into the next question. So as movements, how do you see Black Lives Matter and Me Too intersecting? Where do you see them diverge? And what makes the contemporary movements different from or similar to anti-racism and anti-sexual violence movements of the past?
I think it's already been addressed that, both movements have been established, or the ideology by Black women. I think what is interesting, though, in that is that although they were established by Black women, the voice and justice for Black women is still largely void in both of these movements. And so, what then becomes the groundwork or the foundation that has to be laid to get justice and our voices heard, to have, once again, our viable place at the table. I think in regards to the Black Lives Matter movement, there has been more opposition as opposed to the Me Too movement. I think largely because of the focus, right? And so, even in regards to the Me Too movement, although founded or started by a Black woman, but it did not materialize until white, middle class, upper class women began to push the movement, right? So then you have this ideology that the white patriarch can get behind a little bit because maybe it might affect their daughter, their wife, their mother, right? Somebody close to them. But when it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement, you find more opposition because there's a lack of empathy. You may not have to walk in my shoes. You might just encounter the one person at work that is Black, and you can still go home and live your day without ever understanding the full scope of their experience. And so I think those are some of the fundamental differences in regards and similarities to the movement.
I think what comes up for me in thinking about these two movements and also thinking about um, other movements and things as well is, a lot of movements, when Black women are involved, I think people expect them to do the heavy lifting and do the work. And so they do a lot of this groundwork. And then people come in and they're like, okay, well, now that, you did all this hard work, let me come in and, dictate who should be in the forefront, who should be represented by these movements. And I think with both of these and movements and thinking about past movements, it just also really highlights this idea that Black women are always kind of left out or like in the middle. Because if you think about, for instance, like feminism, initially a lot of Black women were involved with that, but then you had some people being like, well, you're too focused on women's issues, and other people being like, well, you're too focused about race, when both of those are parts of our identity. And so I feel like with certain movements, it's this expectation that you need to highlight one identity or one part of your identity over the other. Um, and I think that just ends up happening a lot. And I think that with um, with every movement, I think a lot of times people really want to ignore the experiences of Black women. They don't really want to deal with that. They want to deal with the parts that are comfortable with for them. They want to deal with the parts that resonate with only their experience. So if their experience can be centered, then it's fine. If their experience cannot be centered, they don't want to hear about it.
I think that both the movements are no different than feminism, particularly when we think of Susan B. Anthony, and everybody loves the work that Susan B. Anthony did. Well, I take that back. White women love the work that Susan B. Anthony did. But if we go back a little further in history, Black women, the women of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, were already doing the work that Susan B. Anthony and her homegirls were already doing. They were doing it on their respective campuses, in their neighborhoods, and things of that nature. And so it speaks to that intersectionality that we talk about all the time, that the Black women were already doing the work. And so they decided, yeah, we need to be a part of this movement. But they had to ask for permission, right? They had to ask for permission from the Black men in their lives. And they also had to ask permission from the white women. So they sat down with Susan B. and her homegirls and were like, hey, we need to be a part of this. And they were like, we don't really need you, but we need you. We need you to make this march look bigger than it really is. And so if you're going to march, you're going to have to march from the back. And so in this movement, and just like every other movement, I'm still marching the same march from the back, and it's exhausting.
Nestic, you bring up a very valid point about where the positioning of the work is done, right?
For sure.
And even about being exhausted. One of the things that you keep hearing in this time of COVID and political and social unrest, right? I keep hearing my family and friends and Black people in particular talk about, I'm exhausted, right? Because this is not a new narrative for us. This is a long-stemming, ongoing, ugly concept that continues to repeat itself. And so when we talk about, I think earlier it was brought up about post-traumatic stress, right? And so having to deal with the trauma of continual discrimination, continual police brutality, continual sexual victimization, whatever those things are, in spite of it, we have to keep moving, or we're expected to keep moving, because within the Black community, if we don't keep moving, then we look fragile, right? So then we can't address our mental health, because to admit that we're fragile to the overarching race then puts us in the very place they want to see us. And so we become so overwhelmed and bogged down, but there's still this thing that propels us to say, nope, I got to keep going. I got to fight another day, but all at the expense of our mental health. And so it's not an easy fight. It is a struggle. I remember a couple of months ago, after George Floyd was killed, there was an article that came out and said something about, to my white coworkers, no, I'm not okay. So don't ask me if I'm okay. No, I'm not okay, because this is a continual fight. You don't want to really walk a day in my shoes. You really can't understand the scope or the totality of even my experience or my ancestors' experiences. And so we hold that in. We get to a place where we have to seek each other out for support. It's pretty easy maybe for white women, men, or other people to turn off the TV or the news. Even if I choose to turn off the TV and the news, I'm still getting texts. I'm still getting beings on social media to talk about, this was messed up, whatever the situation may be. And so it's not something that we can readily escape. We walk in it every minute of the day. And so just having to keep that in mind, but we have to find a place where we're able to express. Where are those safe spaces? I remember in 2016, right after I came to campus that summer, once again, there were back-to-back killings of Black men by the police. Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, and there was one other one, and I can't remember the name right off. But I remember other Black coworkers reaching out to me to express their frustration, their unbelief, their grief, their loss, because once again, this is a perpetual cycle. I think even for me as a Black woman of a mother of a Black son, these type of incidents brings more hypervigilance for me, more awareness of the continual conversations I have to have with him during these times, and even when he was a small child. And so there are just different conversations that we have to have within the Black community to keep ourselves in a good place to even come on discussions like this and have intellectual conversations, or just to have conversations within our circle, right? To navigate spaces where people don't understand and they want to challenge the difference between Black lives, all lives, and Blue Lives Matter, right? Because they can't get the notion that our lives have always been minimized, dehumanized, and not held value for this society. And so, to still have to deal with why Black Lives Matter is important is exhausting.
Going off of what Dr. Warren said, it really makes me think about the concept of racial battle fatigue. Like, Black people are constantly experiencing that. And, when you think about that concept, it talks about like the different stress responses that people experience due to constantly dealing with racism. So you have fatigue, you have um, this inability to sleep, or maybe you sleep a whole lot. Maybe you eat more, maybe you don't eat more. Having issues with breathing, blood pressure, just so many different areas, and it affects like your ability to do the work that you want to do the academic work that you want to do, to be able to be creative and innovative in ways that are possible, because you're spending all this energy that you could be using to do more productive stuff, to figure out in every situation and every environment that you're in what is happening in this context. Figuring out, well, if someone says, oh, you spoke really eloquently, are they actually complimenting you? Or is this just them displaying the fact that they didn't think that you would be capable of stringing together a, a well put together sentence in the first place? And so constantly having to think about and process every moment, every interaction in every space, it is exhausting.
Robin or Nestic? Oh, sorry. Veronica, were you going to add something?
I was just reading some of the comments, and Dr. Grady shared that there is no equity in racism, and Black Lives Matter is unbothered by white approval, inclusion, or connection, and there should be no marching in the back for Black women. And I think that is so well said. And I even think, though, when I saw that statement about there should be no marching in the back for Black women, but it gets back to that whole persona that Black women should be the savior in various situations, right? So like even now we're hearing things around social media saying that Black women are going to be the ones that save the day on election day, right? But we are still the ones that are in spaces that on any given day we're not seen as truly valued for the positions that we hold. And so it's still that struggle, and it gets back to that place of exhaustion of, okay, this continual fight, right? And then Sierra talked about, in regards to this battle fatigue and mental exhaustion, about being one of the highest, why Black women have the highest rate, or one of the highest rate for heart disease, right? Because we know mental health and physical health are intertwined. And so when we are not in a good place to take care of ourselves, then we will fall victim to these other ills in regards to our overall health.
So, in case folks aren't aware, so I think oftentimes when we think of the civil rights movement, one Black woman that comes to mind is Rosa Parks, but people might not be familiar with her work in the movement to end sexual violence, in particular fighting for justice for Recy Taylor. So I don't know if anybody wants to share about that story or kind of reflect on that connection and that, I guess, that lack of connection often in the mainstream conversation around the civil rights movement and Rosa Parks in particular.
I can go.
Thank you.
I read a quote that said Rosa Parks was a sexual assault advocate way before she decided to give up her seat on the bus. And that has been, that has sat with me since I heard it. Rosa Parks was, and I think that because of the not giving up her seat on the bus, that's the fluffy part of it. That's the fluffy part of her life. When she was actually like solving sexual assault, like she was going into the deep South and solving rapes and murders of Black women because police departments weren't doing anything. And so the NAACP wanted to do something about Black women dying after being raped and murdered and all of those things. And so they connected with Rosa Parks, and she was literally going into the deep South, solving these murders. She was being forced out. She was being ran out. She was being dragged out of these small towns, trying to get justice for Black women. And so it just speaks to the thought of Black women having to save Black women, and that notion that we, if I don't do it, who will? And so I think that some of that comes with the fatigue that we were discussing, because we feel like if I don't do it, who will? And we're afraid to take breaks and talk about our true and authentic feelings and things of that nature. It's a really great documentary.
I honestly don't think that we can even take breaks, Nestic. And I just want to piggyback off of that. Like, I don't think that we've ever been allowed to take breaks. 29 years old, I feel like I'm heading an agency because it is in our soul to do this work. And I believe that advocacy and being of support to other Black people is the way that I want to go out. Like, if I have to be in all honesty, I don't I don't know that we get to a place where this changes. I feel like we're having this conversation right now. I can't get away from the power in y'all's voices right now, but in just a short year, I've turned 29. I've gotten a divorce. I have just finished my master's degree. We had a national health crisis. Um, my eye is swelling right now, and I just sold a truck with 4 AK-47 bullets in it from going down to fight for justice in Minnesota. Like, I don't think that there is a time. We're talking about racial battle fatigue, and I'm wondering how many Black women are in all of our lives right now that are actually dealing with that right now.
Mhm.
Like those are the things that I'm wondering. How many people do we call? How many news stations has called our agency and said, "Well, can you do a story about this?" But there was nothing done for my clients in return. How
That's
many
good.
emails have we gotten that like I'm at a point where it's like, please don't call my phone. We have Black women every single day that are coming to report at our agency, but just want to heal with each other. Because how many ways do you want us to say that the police don't care about us? The system doesn't care about us. Going to another meeting at city council ain't gonna change nothing for Black people. That's gonna change something for white folks, for white women, for the Me Too. Like it took Black women on Twitter to make sure that we got our credit for that. And so
Definitely.
it's hard for me. Like I'm listening to you all, I keep coming back to your voice. I'm probably having an allergic reaction right now because of racism. And that's facts. As executive director of an agency, like what I want for Black people is more Black people to continue to be there for each other, to change the way that we think about our own community, the way that we think about our culture and sexual violence and the isms, because I feel like right now it is a pandemic and a virus that allow white people to slow down enough to give enough of a damn, and a virus that they for the first time in their lives felt like could creep up on them, destroy mom and pop in a way that they had no control over. I think this is the first time that white people have gotten this close to what it feels like to I almost said be Black, but I will never do that. But for the first time in their lives, they feared something that was really out of their control with their money and their access and their power. For the
That's
first time in their
good,
lives,
Robin. That's so good. I'm sorry. That's real. That's powerful.
it's like it's life. For the first time, they've gotten that close to what it feels like to be an inkling of us 400 years ago. And like we're talking about fast forward, and we're woke, and we're in this together, and we're getting back to our roots, and all these other things, and still no respect, no appreciation, no reparations. Like it's hard to have conversations, but I'm here because the other Black women are here, and they give you power. Literally, are like amping me up right now. But racial battle fatigue, yes, that's real. How many of us are in these conversations still gonna get off this call and get into another one and get another degree and another degree? We know that we're magic. We just need folks to do what's necessary, what we know needs to be done to give Black people their inches, and that's it.
Thank you, Robin, for that. I think that everything you said was so powerful. I just stop and think, and I've been in discussion to say, why is this time of social unrest or the killing of Black men and women so different in our history, right? Because this has been going on. And when I reflect, I keep saying COVID has happened, right? When we were, where some of us are still at home, right? we've had to sit still. And during May, when George Floyd was killed, many were still at home because there were stay-at-home orders, and we weren't really going out except for necessity, right? And so now, where traditionally people were able to go to work, go home, catch what segment of the news that they like to watch, right? And then go about their day-to-day activity with no regard to anything else. The pandemic made people sit still, where people were connected to their laptops, their cell phones, their tablets, their iPads. They kept seeing the feeds that we traditionally see day to day of Black men and women being killed at the hand of vigilantes and or police, right? And so I think that might be one of the biggest factors why so many people now have been willing to have these discussions, have been willing to become a part of the movement, because now what we've been saying for so long, you got to see it over and over again, just like we had to see over and over again when the Twin Towers fell, right? And we talked about how traumatic that was. And so the same thing with the pandemic, sitting still, we got to see over and over again how the lives of Black people are snuffed out without any disregard. And so putting people in a different space to be willing to hear. But what it has also done is brought out those who we knew were there, right? Or others who are showing that they do not care about this movement. They have no regard for us. You know, even when I think about statements that was made, and I'm not trying to make this political, but even on yesterday evening, where it can be said on national TV for an extremist group to stand back, right? And basically be in a waiting position, inappropriate. And once again goes to the heart of the matter of our lives are not valued or supported because you can't even speak to say that Black Lives Matter, right? And so once again, when I think about, you asked another question about how these movements, the contemporary movements, are affected by past movements or similar to past movements. And I think that one of the things, when you look at the historical, like civil rights movement, those movements oftentimes were rooted and grounded in the Black church and came out of the Black church, or even had partnerships with other white churches, right, that help propel some of these movements, some of these organizations like the NAACP, SLIC, and so forth. I'm not saying that the Black church's voice is absent, but it is very different because of the power of social media. The hashtag of Me Too, the hashtag of Black Lives Matter has made these movements, put these movements in the forefront and in everybody's ear, so to speak, right? Whether you agree with it or not. And so the power of social media has done a lot in order to advance and get the word out about these movements. And I think that is also the power of these movements, because you don't necessarily have an official leader of the movement, where you had like the Stokely Carmichaels, you had Martin Luther King, you had Malcolm X. There's not necessarily one person identified with these movements because of the power of the internet and how people can mobilize and form in order to have peaceful marches and protests around this nation and around the world.
Now, how is somebody supposed to follow up after that? I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry. Somebody else can go, because I'm not going. I'm not going after that. So
I'm gonna head out, Dr. Warren.
Right. Oh, I lost. Oh, my computer crashed. I'm sorry.
I just, we were talking about Black women feeling like they can't, they can't sit back, they can't not do this work. And I think about, we're talking about how, people are having to pay attention to what's happening now. But I also find myself just wondering when when people are gonna, decide, oh, I don't want to be involved with this. Right now everything is like, let's talk about anti-racism. Let's talk about all these things that plenty of minoritized people have been talking about for a long time and were ignored, were prevented from moving up in positions, all of these things. And so now it's like a go-to of let's talk about this. But I find myself being like, for how long? How long is everyone going to be interested in this? How long are people going to supposedly, take up and carry this mantle? And when will it once again completely just fall on us because people go on with their lives and are like, oh, well, it was solved because, we got some things here and there, ignoring the fact that these systems are still heavily in place. I think that we just get comfortable being like, well, we did some programming here and there, we did some trainings, but we really don't think about it at a bigger system, at a bigger level. Like, what does this mean for people? How are we changing these things? How are we making it to where people who are constantly brutalized feel safe and are safe? We don't want them to just have this perception of safety, but ensuring that we actually are safe in the spaces that we enter and respected in the spaces that we enter.
Agreed. Those that are closest to the problems are also closest to the solutions. And so I find myself weekly just really like going back to that meme that's going around Facebook. I'm a head out. Like out of discussions, out of conversations, like in so many ways. Like as you all are talking, I'm thinking about a sister of mine, Stephanie Ortiz, in the work. And I'm thinking about 2016 when we started after Philando Castile was murdered in Minnesota, the work and how many Black folks were in that circle and how we were healing and finding ways to rejoice and to be more resilient together. And that's where I find my power, and that's where I like find the means to continue. I'm finding the means even in our conversation right now because of the joy that's in this chat and in the power in the voices that we have. But I keep going back to this fact that I got a sister right now who is fighting for her mother's freedom and fighting for her own freedom. And I even got hung up in answering the questions earlier, because there's so much pain that is going on in our lives right now. And you to be young, Black, and free, what is that? What is that? Like, I can't even enjoy a walk down the street with my dog Piper. And the only reason I have a dog is because of protection for my children. I have a 6-foot fence now in my backyard because otherwise I would not let my kids go out there. We came from Minnesota after I went there with my staff feeling like we needed to be close to our brother who was murdered. And we got shot at by people wearing police issued vests and AK-47s walking down the street. My staff was shot at. They jumped out of a moving truck where my windows in a brand new car was blown out. And it was only minutes before that I thought, why am I here? And I should never have to be American where my ancestors have died literally and worked to the bone so that they could be free, so that their future generations could be free. I started thinking, why am I here right now? Why am I putting my truck at risk? Why am I putting my life at risk? but I know that I was there because another Black person was murdered, and the world does not care. And so I was going there to pay tribute to another one that was fallen. And it was almost us that needed that support next.
So I'll just piggyback off of what Robin was saying, and the other women. Oftentimes, I don't know that oftentimes that black women hear or understand that they are deserving of rest. So to the Black women on this call, on this recording, you are deserving of rest and you are deserving of good things. And sometimes those good things is rest, right? So we're always training up the next generation so that we can hand the baton off and somebody hand the baton off to us and all of those things. And still, we owe it to our ancestors to rest because they didn't have the luxury of resting. Somebody in the comments said that we don't always have to be strong, and that is just a great reminder. I know it's easier said than done, especially when I just said that if I don't do it, who will, right? But we have to work towards getting just rest. There is healing in rest, there's power in rest, and we are deserving of rest. That wasn't a question, but I needed to throw that out there on behalf of my sister Robin, who I need to rest, who I need her to pass the baton to. I need her to get her eyes together, right? Like how Black woman of her to be on a panel with an allergic reaction and still handle her business, right? Because she is deserving of rest.
Felt like we just needed to sit in that for a second. What else is coming up for you all for the panelists around our conversation? Or if folks have questions, throw them in the chat.
I know that there is a question towards the end about how folks can support Black women, and I just wanted to bring that up into the space as we are sitting in what was last said. Support them, follow their lead, stop questioning and challenging their expertise. I work with sexual assault programs around the state, and it's just my quote expertise is always questioned. And so I know that other Black women with doctorates and PhDs and all of these other things, and it always questioned. And white women particularly need to stop that. I would also say stand up for them in front, right? If something is happening that you know is microaggressions, that is flat out racist, that are all of these things, say something in front of. Don't come to my office and say, oh, I saw that happened. I'm sorry, how can I help? Right? I need you to help me in front of. I need you to do that. I have this saying when I tell white people to get their white people, right? Like it's not my job, especially when you see something, because white women have less to lose than Black women, right? Particularly when they're standing up for themselves. I could be talking about rainbows, dogs, and puppies, and no matter what I say, I'm still going to be viewed as the angry Black woman, right? And so if you are an aspiring ally, if that's your thing, you need to be stepping up, because tomorrow I could be fired just for existing, right? Insubordination, they'll find something. And white women don't have to worry about the exact same things that Black women have to worry about in academia, in the workspaces, in the grocery store, right? White women have less to lose because of the white damsel in distress, right? So those are just some ways that folks can support Black women.
So I think we can keep building off of what Nestic shared, and go into that last question of what are examples of ways attendees can take action to support Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movements, and more urgently and specifically, how can attendees better support Black women in particular?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we use the term ally, and there's another term out there that is taking root called co-conspirator, right? And so, and I think because the term ally sometimes has been so watered down, overused, right? And so co-conspirator is the term to kind of recapture um, being in the fight, being in the struggle, right? Going the extra mile to use the power of your privilege to move the envelope, to make structural changes, right? And so, from a co-conspirator aspect, you can't get weary or weak. You can't have your toe dipped in today and out tomorrow, because now it's getting too hard for you, because now you're doing battle with family and friends and so forth. So you have to be in the struggle. And I think that's one of the hardest parts, is because you want to say that you are an ally, but you're not, right? And so say what you say, mean what you say, and do the work behind what you're saying that you're going to do. Because the struggle for us is every day. We don't have a choice to be in and out. And so if you're going to support, then you have to do it wholeheartedly. It's not just by show of words, it is by action. Because showing of words has not moved the envelope, so to speak. Also being able to stay educated. It is not my role to educate, right? You have to stay educated. You have to find your voice in your space. Don't try to minimize my experience based on your misinformation. My experience of being Black, being a Black woman, being a woman is very different. But you don't get to come in and minimize my experience or invalidate my experience. And so I think also, as Black women, we have to stay vocal, even in the midst of being tired, fatigue, even in the midst of, like Nestic said, to Robin, being able to pass the baton. Even in doing so, our work is never done. because we have to stay on the front lines to ensure that our voices continue to be heard and they are not minimized or disregarded.
I think also, like, people really need to sit and figure out why they're so uncomfortable and really processing their own anti-blackness. Like, it shouldn't be on us to try to figure that out for you. Like, and so, if people are listening to this conversation or watch it later and, anger or all these other emotions rise up for you, like, you really need to sit with that and figure out what it is that's making you feel that way. And not just come to some simple conclusion or a simple conclusion that, oh, well, it's because they don't know what they're talking about, or, oh, it's because they're just so angry, or they didn't present it in a way that, was comfortable for me. Like, really figure that out, because you can say all the nice things. You can be like, oh, well, I'm not racist, or, oh, I'm not sexist, or whatever. But if that's still like underlying and you're still uncomfortable with Black women speaking in a certain way or talking about certain issues, like, there's still some work that you need to do. And that's not on us to carry that.
I'll piggyback off of that. That was amazing. I'm not here. I have gotten to a point where I'm not here for white comfort, right? Like I'm just not doing it, right? And no matter, again, no matter what I'm saying, it's going to be, your response is going to be rooted in anti-blackness. And I'm just not here for white comfort. I'm not here to, at least I'm not here for it for free, right? Now, if you would like to uh, contract me in to carry you through your white fragility, then I'm here for it, but I'm not doing it for free, right? And so Dr. Monique Liston, she graduated from the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and she talks about how anti-blackness is just your acceptance to Black people and their dignity, right? So if you have some anti-blackness feelings going on, you're gonna have to figure it out on your own, because I'm not here to walk you through that, and I'm simply not gonna do it for free.
I want to kind of piggyback off of what Nestic was saying, and it kind of brought to mind, like, we're in the thick of this battle right now. And when you have someone that is signing executive orders about people or agencies who receive federal dollars, that they cannot participate or should not be marketing um, programs that deal with white fragility, white privilege. We are in the thick of this fight. And so, knowing that this is not for the faint or the weak at heart, this is something that you have to be flat footed, firm, and keep moving forward, because the struggle is real. I know that might sound cliche, but this is where we are right now. This is the society and time what has given us at this time. And so be aware that the struggle is going to continue. And so being resolved that if this is what you want to do, is one thing to say, oh, I'm all for social justice and social action, but it's time to walk the walk. And the way you walk the walk is, every time these issues come up, you may feel like you are on the one that is going to have to address the misinformation that somebody is given. And the only way you can do that is being educated on the full experiences of the movement.
So just in case people haven't heard or aren't aware, I did link a CNN article that in the chat that talks about the proposed ban on diversity training, and some of the keywords that they have used in banning it is critical race theory, white privilege, intersectionality, systemic racism, positionality, racial humility, and unconscious bias. So many of the things that we have been here talking about.
And can I just add one other thing? In the midst of this, the last couple of months, there has been a huge push by many organizations, agencies, whether it's the NBA, um, to hire positions of diversity, like chief diversity officers, right? And so as a participant or an employee of any of these organizations that have chief diversity officers, you need to make sure that that organization is putting the dollars behind that position, are putting the resources behind that position in order for them to feel empowered to do the work that they have been asked to do. This is not a time that to have somebody just as a figurehead in those positions. They have to be given the resources in order to move in those positions, in order to make viable change.
And at a policy level, right? We hiring folks and whoever, but if it's not in the policy, if and when that chief diversity such and such person leaves, if it's not in the policies, then you have just wasted your money and the energy of that person.
Dr. Warren, Dr. Grady asks, what would you say about whites who learn but then want to train on their white privilege instead of taking action or amplifying Black voices? And I would say other panelists are welcome to share their perspective as well.
I think it can be powerful if indeed when there are those who are understanding their privilege and how it has overall impact the lives of Black and Brown people. I think it can be used in a very powerful way. But once again, I think also that you have to know and be comfortable to sit and walk in that space, because there are very powerful voices out there that will try to intimidate, try to back you down from the information you have learned. So you need to be well versed before you walk out there and get yourself in a situation where you feel like then, okay, maybe I got this thing wrong. But once again, do not walk in the space that you understand all of our overarching experience, that then it minimizes our experiences, because I think that has happened too. I think somebody said well-intended white people sometimes do too much, right? And then it waters down our struggle, our fight, our voices. And so be very educated about what needs to happen, how you can challenge other people. And maybe that's what the discussion needs to be. How do you challenge other people to understand the privileges that they've had from the historical foundation of this country, and how systemically it has impacted the lives of Black people?
Okay, we have another question. How do we get other white folks to understand the systems under white supremacy and colonialism who are new to those conversations?
If I was being honest, I would say we don't, because if how are
Facts.
you new to these conversations? Ask Siri, go to a library, um, go open Facebook. Like, that's it for me.
I would just add, if it's coming from a person of privilege, right? How did that information get translated to you? How did you learn the information? So, is that a viable way for the information to be taught as well? I saw a video some time ago, and we were going to use the video in a diversity training that we were doing. And it talks about the way that you tell somebody that they're racist. And really, what it talked about is that you don't tell them necessarily that they're racist, but you talk about like the behaviors, right, that they exhibit. Because the minute you tell somebody that they're racist or sexist, their defense mechanisms go up. And so the first thing you hear is, oh, I'm not racist. And then they get into this litany of reasons of why they're not that thing, right? And so being able to be very specific about the behaviors that they exhibit, or their inability to want to learn and be open to other ideas and experiences and diversities. And so that is the way I think when you begin to start broaching conversations in order to do so. Not to say there might not be a time that you have to call somebody out, but you have to be clear of what you're going to come up against and when you call somebody out.
I saw in the chat that it asked, should white people educate each other? Each person should be responsible for their own learning. And I feel like it's a mix of both, because while everybody should be doing their own learning, and it should be an ongoing process because it doesn't stop. You don't get to the certain level and you're like, oh, well, I'm culturally competent or whatever. It's an ongoing process. Um, at the same time, you're going to have to educate other people, and you're going to have to also hold other people accountable. I think that's been one of the biggest issues in terms of, the different isms, is that we hold on to, oh, well, they just didn't know. Oh, they're just ignorant. And my question has always been, well, how long does somebody get to be ignorant about something? Because I can think about for myself, there's certain things that whether I had a lot of experience with it or not, I'm still expected to know. So it's a little difficult for me to be okay with, well, people, they get this big like learning curve and big extensive period of time to learn and not know and all of this stuff, when the expectation for me is I'm supposed to know everything. I have to understand how other people operate. I have to understand how the dominant culture operates and how I'm supposed to operate within that. So, people have to be accountable and we have to hold others accountable.
It's I'm hearing all the different comments. I'm trying to listen to the comments in the chat. And so, Avian talked about or asked, do we think like African American studies should be a requirement for first year students? And I would love to see that as a requirement, because a lot of times it's not until students unfortunately get to college, right, that they experience very different ideas, different people. And then you hear the stories about the misinformation they've been given about um, slavery, Jim Crow laws, civil rights movement, right? And so being able to understand the totality of variant experiences, I think would be great. Um, but getting, I think, higher education to make that move might be challenging, but I do believe that it is something that should be taught. I think there's a lot of different cultures um, and ethnic groups that should be taught about at a higher educational level. I think this will make our society more well-rounded, make us understand the different experiences, and then even how to respond accordingly, and to even begin to make those structural policy changes that we are talking about. I think organizations who really pride themselves on inclusivity, they get it. They do what they need to do to make things happen. And so I think when we start making recommendations like these, then we really begin to see where the heart of the institution may lie.
And if people missed the announcement from, this is specific to UWO, but they are starting to implement mandatory staff training. It'll be a training focused primarily on implicit bias, but the hope is to have that as like a starting point for all staff, which would then, hopefully that's not where it ends, but at least everyone will have to go through that training. I was thinking that perhaps Dr. Grady might want to jump on and join the conversation and introduce herself, especially since we were just talking about Chief Diversity Officers. And so Dr. Grady is the Associate Vice Chancellor of Academic Support of Inclusive Excellence and the Chief Diversity Officer for UWO. Longest title ever. But Dr. Grady, would you like to jump on and share some thoughts?
Yeah, I don't have any thoughts to share. Honestly, I think what we need to do better as women of color is just be hype mans and support those who are speaking. So I want to make sure I'm amplifying the voices that are on here. So I've been your hype man in the chat. This has been great. I've been here less than a month, and what I've realized is we have a lot of work to do. Every day I'm amazed at the work that's taking place, but then also the lack of connection and intersections that I see that would really amplify the work that's been done and what we could do to move it forward. So thank you for this discussion and letting me introduce myself. There's a few people that you might be hearing from me. I've been taking notes. I need to connect with that person, or yes, I like what they said. So if you get an email from me, I just want to connect and introduce myself and get to know more about you and your work. So thank you for inviting me to listen in. I will go back now to being your hype man in the chat.
Thank you. Sierra, do you want to jump in and introduce yourself as also a local, like part of the local service provider at Reach and some of the work that you all have been doing?
All right, hold on. Sorry, I was like, let me get. So let me see. Anywho, so yes, my name is Sarah Hill. I work.
Sierra, you're super quiet.
We can't hear you.
this better?
Nope.
Okay. 1 second.
Is your hand over the mic?
My phone sucks. Okay.
I think if you click on the three little dots, it'll show if your mic is connected to the speaker or the internal mic. So make sure it's on the speaker.
Is this better for everyone?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I had to get my headphones. I'm on my phone and it's pretty bad. So my name is Sierra Hill, and I am the advocacy director for a sexual assault agency in the area. We see children and adults that have experienced that form of trauma any point in their life. We provide legal, medical, and personal advocacy and school advocacy, as well as we have therapists and educators. And Our educators are actually the ones that are going into the schools and teaching about body autonomy and sexual abuse and body basics and how to keep your body safe and everything like that. And yeah, I'm loving this conversation, and I'm just really happy that I was able to be a part of it and to add my 2 cents here and there. But yeah, I second, third, and fourth everything that everyone's been saying. And yeah, that is all.
Thank you. All right, panelists, any concluding thoughts, or did we miss any questions in the chat?
Alicia, it looks like Brooke had a question in here too. We both did, but y'all can ignore my question because I kind of answered it already.
Do you want to name the question?
Yeah. It says, would teachers be able to teach those classes if they don't understand them and are still focused on white European history? I totally agree that it should be taught, but also looking at white teachers who may not teach it well at all.
Anybody have thoughts on that? I think it also connects back to what we were talking about way earlier with the, I think it was Nestic who was sharing about Rosa Parks and that being the watered down version. And I think that is often what gets taught in schools, that like peaceful protest, that type of approach, which then doesn't give the full picture or connect to an understanding of present day pain.
I think with that, with a lot of different training programs, you would have to revamp the entire training program. And I mean, that relates to a lot of programs I even think about sometimes with counseling programs. when it comes to multiculturalism and things like that, you might get one class. Some programs are better at infusing that into all of the classes. Some are just like, well, we have this one standalone class, that's enough. And so if you're really expecting people to educate others in this realm, they have to have a lot of exposure to it. And they also have to have a lot of observations and be evaluated, because once again, they have to be held accountable. So if it's just like, here's this information and, go teach it, and we just hope and have faith that it'll be done in the way that it needs to be, it's not going to happen.
Dr. Warren, any thoughts?
I would concur with Dr. Bowser in her response to the question. I think also Sierra brought up a valid point that most parents don't know how to educate their children, and so teachers need to be taught. And so, but what does that teaching experience look like, right? Does every public school system or parochial school system have someone that is abreast of in diversity issues in order to really sit down and train teachers on how to appropriately talk about historical matters in the textbooks, right? As we know, some of the textbooks don't have accurate information. It is very skewed. And so it is a entire system that would need to be changed and restructured. When I think about something recently that I just saw on social media, where a teacher, a white female teacher, was talking disparagingly to her students about George Floyd, and a parent became very upset, told the teachers it was inappropriate, the things that she was saying in regards to George Floyd and trying to demean his character, and snatched the child out of the classroom, right? And so now you have a situation where a student is not learning viable information. Now you have contention between the parent and the teacher, and then a teacher who probably feels in her beliefs are correct in what she was saying. And so there is so many, and another thing that has many different layers, that people would have to be taught and trained on how to do it in a way that is not demeaning or further traumatizing, or creating false narratives about the experiences and people that they are to teach on.
Thank you so much. I think, to respect folks' times, we'll conclude there. I am going to put in the chat that I hope that you all join us for the 30th annual Fox Valley Take Back the Night. This year is actually going to be called Take Back the Week, because we are going to have a week-long series of events and calls to action, and we are centering Black Lives Matter throughout all of the activities and discussions for the week. So I hope that you all will join us. A more detailed schedule will be posted in that Facebook event, so please share widely. And thank you all for joining us, and please help me in thanking the panelists for a truly terrific discussion. The recording of this panel will be on the Women's Center website, or you can send me an email and I can send you the link. Thank you, panelists. Have a great Wednesday, everyone.
Thank you.